This is The Quiet End, and tonight I'll tell you a story titled The Forgotten Room. Let's begin. Jane and Daniel had barely unpacked when the peculiarities of their new apartment began to surface. The place was old, centuries perhaps, with high ceilings and ornate woodwork that hinted at forgotten craftsmanship. It felt alive, as if the walls were hiding stories too shy to reveal themselves. Jane, ever pragmatic, dismissed the unease as the charm of older architecture. Daniel, though, couldn't shake the feeling that the apartment watched them as much as they watched it. It was a week later, while rearranging furniture, that they found it. In the dim light of the hallway, Daniel's shoulder bumped against a bookcase that groaned with an unnatural weight. The sound wasn't just wood against plaster, it seemed deeper, resonant, as though something shifted behind it. Curious and unable to ignore the strange echo, he pushed harder until the bookcase gave way to reveal what had been concealed for decades, maybe longer, a hidden door. The door itself was unimpressive, its paint peeling and hinges rusted. Jane wanted to leave it alone, but Daniel's curiosity was relentless. After prying the swollen frame open, they found a room, a small, windowless enclosure that felt unnaturally cold despite the summer heat outside. Dust clung thickly to the air, and the only object inside was a tarnished mirror leaning against the far wall. Its surface seemed warped, as though the glass had melted and settled unevenly. Jane stepped closer, her reflection staring back at her. That's when the unease became palpable. Her image in the mirror didn't exactly match her movements. It lagged like an old film reel. Daniel joined her, peering into the glass. His own reflection did the same, but just as he adjusted his posture, his image didn't. It stood still for a moment longer than it should have, its eyes locked on his with an expression that didn't belong to him. "It's broken," Jane muttered, her voice trembling slightly. She turned to leave, but Daniel stayed rooted in place, drawn by something he couldn't define. The room's air felt heavier with each second, pressing against their chests. And then, for the briefest moment, both their reflections smiled, not playfully but unnervingly, with a sharpness that didn't match their faces. Daniel staggered back, pulling Jane out of the room as he slammed the door shut. The hallway outside felt normal again, or so they thought. Neither spoke of what they had seen, but as they walked away, the mirror's faint, distorted laughter echoed faintly through the wood. The discovery of the hidden room left Jane uneasy, but Daniel brushed it off as an oddity, just a strange quirk of old architecture. Yet Jane couldn't forget the mirror. Its warped surface lingered in her thoughts, like a shadow that refused to fade. Later that evening, while unpacking near the hallway, her eyes involuntarily drifted toward the closed door. A chill ran down her spine. She knew she shouldn't, but curiosity gnawed at her. She slid the door open just enough to peek inside. The mirror was still there, standing silently in the dim light. Her reflection greeted her, but it was subtle, too subtle. As she turned her head to glance behind her, she caught it. Her image in the mirror didn't move the same way. It lingered, frozen, as though it were watching her instead of mimicking her. Her breath caught in her throat. A sharp sense of dread rooted her in place. "Daniel," she whispered, louder as panic crept into her voice. "Come here." He sighed but joined her reluctantly, his skepticism painted across his face. "It's just an old mirror, Jane, probably warped from age." "Look at it," she urged, her voice trembling. "What do you see?" Daniel stepped inside the room, his gaze fixed on the tarnished surface. His reflection stared back, seemingly normal at first, but as he leaned closer, the reflection smiled. Daniel didn't. His face remained blank, but the image in the mirror curved its lips into a grin too wide, teeth too sharp. The reflection's eyes twinkled with an almost predatory glee. Daniel froze, his heart pounding, sweat pooling on his brow. "Let's go," he muttered, grabbing Jane's arm. They stepped out hurriedly, closing the door behind them with a force that rattled the hallway. Neither said a word. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, but undeniable. That night, Jane couldn't sleep. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were suffused with darkness. She saw the mirror, its surface rippling as though it were alive. From the other side, hands clawed at the glass, pale, sickly hands, their fingers unnaturally long. They scratched and scraped, desperate to break free, leaving trails of blood smeared across the warped surface. Jane woke with a start, her breath ragged, the image burned into her mind. She glanced at the hallway door. It was closed, but she swore she heard faint scratching sounds from the other side. Days passed in uneasy silence. Jane and Daniel avoided the hidden room, though its presence seemed to linger in their minds. The apartment grew heavier, as if the walls were closing in. The once charming creaks of old wood now felt like footsteps following behind them, and shadows stretched unnaturally long in the dim light. It was on the 5th day that Jane noticed it. The door to the hidden room, which they had firmly shut, now stood ajar. She froze, her pulse quickening. She hadn't touched it, and Daniel had been at work all day. Mustering her courage, she stepped closer, her breath shallow as she peeked inside. The mirror had moved. It no longer leaned against the wall in its tarnished, lazy posture. Now it stood upright in the center of the room, its warped surface catching the faint light of the hallway. The walls seemed darker, their once faded paint now slick and damp to the touch, like skin clammy with fear. When Daniel arrived home, Jane told him what she'd seen. He dismissed it, shaking his head. "It's just your imagination running wild," he said, though his tone betrayed a sliver of doubt. That evening, as they passed the hidden room together, Jane paused. "Listen," she hissed, gripping his arm tightly. Daniel raised a brow, but obliged. For a moment, the apartment was silent, but then he heard it too. Faint whispers, as if carried on a cold wind. They were indistinct, yet hauntingly intimate, like secrets meant for ears that didn't belong in this world. He frowned, trying to rationalize the noise. "It's probably the pipes," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Before either of them could move further, their reflections caught their eye. The hallway mirror, innocent and unassuming, betrayed something sinister. Their images seemed subtly wrong. Jane's eyes appeared darker, sunken, while Daniel's teeth seemed slightly sharper. His smile, if it could be called that, stretched unnaturally across his face. Both figures stood still, staring, even as Jane and Daniel turned to look at each other in alarm. The paralysis broke. Daniel grabbed Jane's hand, pulling her away from the hidden room as dread settled deep in their bones. But as they hurried down the hallway, Jane thought she heard the faint sound of laughter behind them, low and guttural, seeping from the cracks of the forgotten door. Jane had busied herself with cleaning, desperate to distract her mind from the oppressive tension that had settled over the apartment. The act of scrubbing and dusting gave her a fragile sense of order, of control. But as she worked her way down the hallway, a sound stopped her cold, a loud, deliberate thud. It came from the hidden room. She froze, gripping the rag in her hand as her pulse quickened. The door was still ajar, its dark opening like a breathing wound in the hallway wall. She told herself she wouldn't go in, that she shouldn't, yet her feet betrayed her, moving closer as if pulled by an unseen force. When she peered inside, her breath hitched. The mirror stood tall and commanding in the center of the room, its presence even more menacing than before. But it wasn't her reflection that greeted her. The figure in the glass was wrong, inhuman. It was tall, impossibly gaunt, with limbs that seemed stretched beyond the limits of anatomy. Its face was a twisted amalgamation of sharp angles and hollow curves, its black eyes vast and depthless. They stared directly at her, unblinking, as if it had been waiting. Jane's hands trembled as the rag fell to the floor. The figure in the mirror leaned closer, its hand pressing against the glass. The surface rippled under its touch, the barrier between them disturbingly thin. Its grotesque face twisted with a smile that was nothing but malice, pure, undiluted malice. A scream tore from her throat, and she stumbled back, slamming the door as she fled the room. She found Daniel in the living room, her heart pounding so hard she could barely get the words out. "It's in there, Daniel. Something's in the mirror. It's not us." He stood, alarmed at her panic, but visibly hesitant. "Jane, calm down. You're letting your imagination get the best of you," he said, though his voice wavered. He placed his hands on her shoulders, trying to steady her. "It's just a reflection. A trick of the light, maybe. Mirrors can distort things." "No," she whispered, shaking her head vehemently. "It was real. It looked at me, Daniel. It wanted to come through." He didn't respond, at least not immediately. Beneath his composed exterior was a growing unease. He had been telling himself the same thing for days. Tricks of the light, old mirrors, nothing sinister. But her terror was contagious, and for the first time he felt the weight of it pressing on his chest. Still, he refused to let it show. He couldn't. Not yet. "I'll check it tomorrow," Daniel finally said. "But we need to stay calm, Jane. It's just an old, creepy house, that's all." Jane said nothing more, but as she sat in the corner of the room, her knees pulled to her chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that the figure's eyes were still on her, even from behind the closed door. The changes began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. Jane's skin took on a pallid sheen, as though drained of vitality. Her eyes darkened, the whites fading to a sickly gray that made her reflection even harder to look at. Daniel wasn't spared either. His movements grew stiff, mechanical, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. He spoke less, his voice carrying a hollow echo that wasn't there before. But the worst was the mirror. It had become a thing they couldn't ignore, no matter how hard they tried. Their reflections no longer mirrored them. Jane would brush her hair, only to see the figure in the glass staring back, motionless, its gaze piercing as her brush moved through empty air. Daniel caught his reflection smiling again, though his own lips never moved. The whispers followed them everywhere now, louder and more insistent, crawling out of the hidden room and infiltrating the very walls. They spoke in fragmented words, in languages that neither of them understood, but the meaning was clear. The apartment belonged to something else, something ancient, and it was waking. On the 7th day, the hum began. Faint at first, it resonated deep within the hidden room, a frequency that vibrated through their bones. It grew louder with each passing hour, until it was impossible to think, impossible to breathe without feeling it reverberate in their chests. Daniel snapped. Grabbing the nearest blunt object, the heavy steel wrench they had used to fix a leaking pipe, he stormed into the room. Jane followed, her terror mounting as she watched him approach the mirror with fury she had never seen in him before. "Enough!" he shouted, raising the wrench high and bringing it down with all his strength. The impact shook the room, but the mirror didn't shatter. Instead, its surface rippled like water, sending waves of distortion across the glass. Daniel staggered back, gripping the wrench tighter and taking another swing. Again, the mirror refused to break, its surface bending and flexing as though taunting him. From deep within its warped depths, the black-eyed figure emerged faintly, its gaunt hand pressing against the glass. This time, Jane saw it too. "Stop!" she screamed, pulling Daniel's arm. He turned to her, his face pale, and for the briefest moment, his eyes weren't his own. They were darker, empty, like the thing in the mirror. She stumbled back, her heart pounding as the hum swelled to an unbearable pitch. The room itself felt alive now, its walls damp and pulsating like flesh. The whispers converged into a single guttural voice that spoke one word, clear and resonant: soon. Daniel dropped the wrench, his hands trembling as Jane dragged him out of the room. They slammed the door shut, but the hum persisted, bleeding into every corner of the apartment. Whatever the mirror was, it wasn't just a reflection. It was a gateway, and it was opening. Jane and Daniel didn't need the mirror to tell them anymore. They could feel it in their blood, in their bones. Their humanity was slipping away. Jane's skin hung in pallid sheets, her once vibrant eyes now dull voids that reflected nothing. Daniel's movements had grown alien, jerky, and detached, as though his body were no longer his to command. The apartment had taken more than their safety. It had stolen pieces of who they were, leaving them as hollow imitations of their former selves. They agreed to leave, their desperation outweighing their fear of the unknown. But when they reached the apartment's front door, they found it locked. Not just stuck or jammed, but sealed as though welded shut. The knob refused to turn, and the air around it felt heavy, oppressive. They turned to find the hallway transformed. The hidden room dominated the space now, its crooked door standing wide open, spilling shadows that stretched unnaturally toward them. The mirror pulsed, its surface beating like a living heart, slow at first, then faster, louder, until the sound consumed everything. Jane's legs trembled, her breath caught in her throat. Daniel clenched his fists, his knuckles ghostly white, but neither moved closer. They couldn't. And then the reflections emerged. Stepping through the glass, they entered the room like liquid shadows made flesh. They were perfect replicas, yet grotesque in their perfection. Jane's reflection smiled with a mouth too wide, its teeth glistening and sharp. Daniel's double moved fluidly, predatorily, its darkened eyes fixed on him. Without hesitation, the reflections reached forward, their cold, unyielding hands gripping Jane and Daniel tightly. Jane screamed, the sound cutting through the hum only for a moment before being swallowed whole. Daniel roared in defiance, thrashing against his other self, but it was futile. The reflections dragged them backward toward the mirror, their movements relentless and inevitable. The glass rippled like water as the couple's bodies were pulled into its depths. As Jane's hand disappeared into the mirror, the apartment fell silent. The hum stopped, the whispers ceased, and the pulsating walls grew still. The door to the hidden room slammed shut with finality, the sound echoing through the empty space. For a moment the apartment felt lifeless, but as the quiet settled, there was an undeniable sense that it was waiting, watching for its next tenants, for its next victims. Always waiting. So tell me, dear listener, when you look into your mirror tonight, will it still be you staring back, or something eager to take your place? Subscribe for more chilling tales, and hit the bell to stay in the dark. See you at the next Quiet End.